It all started when I agreed to house-sit for my aunt while she took a long-overdue vacation. Her house was an old Victorian-style home located on a quiet, wooded street on the outskirts of town. The house itself was a relic of another era, its faded blue paint peeling slightly at the edges, and the overgrown garden giving it an air of quiet abandonment. It had always been her pride and joy, but to me it was a little unnerving. I arrived just before sunset on a crisp November evening, the kind where the wind cuts sharply through your jacket and every shadow seems deeper than usual. My aunt had left detailed instructions about feeding her cat, Henry, watering her countless plants, and ensuring the house was locked up tight at night. I took a mental note of the lock routine as she emphasized it during her goodbye call. Front door, back door, side door, then the windows, double-check everything. That first night, I unpacked my things in the guest room on the second floor. The room was sparsely decorated but cozy, with an old four-poster bed, a vintage dresser, and a small window overlooking the backyard. From the moment I set foot in that room, I felt it. A subtle heaviness in the air, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I shook off the feeling and told myself it was just my nerves. As the evening wore on, I settled into the living room with a cup of tea and my laptop. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of wood or the faint purring of Henry, who had claimed my lap as his throne. By midnight, I decided to call it a night. That's when I heard it for the first time. A faint, distant voice coming from outside. Hello! It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. I paused, straining to listen. The voice came again, slightly louder this time, but still distant. Hello! I froze. My heart started to race as my logical brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe it was someone walking by, a neighbor calling out, but this house didn't have neighbors close enough for their voices to carry like that. I stood up and moved cautiously toward the front window, careful not to make a sound. Peering through the curtains, I scanned the dark street below. Nothing. The voice came again, but now it sounded closer, as though it had moved to the side of the house. I tiptoed to the dining room, where the side window overlooked the garden. The blinds were drawn, but as I lifted one slat just enough to peek out, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the backyard. It was a man, or at least I thought it was. His silhouette was tall and wiry, his posture unnaturally stiff. He stood there, perfectly still, facing the house. My breath caught in my throat. Hello! The word came again, this time unmistakably from him. His voice was hoarse and deliberate, each syllable drawn out like a taunt. I let the blind fall back into place and stepped away from the window, my mind racing. Who was this? What did he want? Should I call the police? Before I could decide, the porch light flickered and then went out. My stomach dropped. That light was on a timer. It should have stayed on until morning. I grabbed my phone, intending to call someone, anyone, but the screen wouldn't light up. No service. I tried the house phone, but the line was dead. My palms were slick with sweat as I realized how isolated I truly was. The voice came again, now from directly outside the living room window. Hello! I felt a chill run down my spine. How had he moved so quickly? Forcing myself to stay calm, I grabbed the curtain and yanked it back. My breath caught as I saw him. His face was inches from the glass, pale and expressionless, with sunken eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "Let me in," he whispered, his lips curling into a slow, deliberate smile. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp in my haste to get away. The crash seemed to startle him, and for a moment, he disappeared into the darkness. My heart was pounding as I bolted upstairs, locking myself in the guest room. I shoved a chair under the doorknob and sat on the bed, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I tried dialing 911 again, but the screen remained blank. Minutes dragged by like hours. I kept expecting to hear footsteps on the stairs or the sound of a window breaking, but the house was silent. Just as I started to think he might be gone, I heard it again. Hello! The voice wasn't coming from outside this time. It was coming from inside the house. I felt my blood run cold. I knew I had locked every door and window. There was no way he could have gotten in. Slowly, I reached for the small closet in the corner of the room, stepping inside and shutting the door behind me. The darkness was suffocating, but I didn't dare make a sound. The floorboards creaked just outside the guest room door. Then came the faintest whisper, so close I could almost feel his breath on my neck. "Let me in." I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming. My entire body was trembling as I heard the chair scraping against the floor, the doorknob rattling. I pressed myself against the back wall of the closet, tears streaming down my face, praying he wouldn't find me. The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and I thought maybe he had given up. Then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh, followed by footsteps retreating down the hallway. I waited for what felt like an eternity before finally opening the closet door. The guest room was empty, but the chair had been moved, and the door was wide open. I didn't wait to see if he was still in the house. I climbed out of the window, using the porch roof to lower myself to the ground, and ran as fast as I could to my car. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, but muddy footprints were scattered throughout the house. The prints led from the backyard to the front porch, then to the staircase, stopping at the guest room door. My aunt returned from her vacation early, horrified by what had happened. She told me that a man matching the description I gave had been seen wandering the neighborhood before. He was rumored to have been a former tenant of the house, evicted years ago after a mental breakdown. I still don't know how he got inside or why he targeted me, but sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the faint echo of his voice in my dreams. "Hello." My name is Daniel, and this happened during my sophomore year at the University of Oregon. I was in a strange place emotionally. My long-term girlfriend had broken up with me a month earlier, and I was still licking my wounds. To distract myself, I started dipping my toes into online dating, mostly out of boredom and curiosity. One evening, while scrolling through a dating app, I came across a profile that immediately caught my eye. Her name was Rachel. She was a striking brunette with sharp green eyes and a radiant smile. Her bio was short but intriguing. Lover of mysteries, night walks, and old movies. We matched quickly and started chatting. Our conversation flowed effortlessly. We both shared a love for thrillers and had similar sarcastic senses of humor. By the third day of talking, Rachel suggested we meet in person. She proposed meeting at a quiet park near campus, close to a coffee shop she claimed to love. Her suggestion was a little odd. Most people would go straight for the coffee shop, but I didn't overthink it. She seemed genuine, and besides, I was desperate for a distraction. The night we planned to meet was cold and foggy, with a biting wind that howled through the empty streets. As I walked toward the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The park was eerily deserted, and the glow of the streetlights barely pierced the thick fog. Rachel had told me to wait near the old stone fountain in the center of the park. I arrived early and found the spot easily. As I waited, I checked my phone and saw a text from her. "On my way. Be there in 5." A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. A tall figure emerged from the fog. Not Rachel, but a man. He was older, maybe in his mid-40s, and dressed in a heavy coat and beanie. I immediately felt uneasy. "Are you Daniel?" he asked, his voice gravelly. I hesitated before responding. "Yeah. Who are you?" "I'm Rachel's brother," he said. "She sent me to pick you up. She got caught up at work but still wants to meet you. I can take you to her." The explanation made no sense. Rachel had never mentioned a brother, and why would she send him instead of texting me directly? I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. "No offense," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but I think I'll just wait for her here." The man's expression darkened. "It's not safe to stand around here alone," he said. "Come on, I'll take you to her." He took a step closer, and I noticed something unsettling. His shoes were caked in mud, as though he'd been trekking through the woods. My heart was pounding now. I forced a polite smile and said, "I'm good, thanks," before quickly walking away. As I left the park, I kept looking over my shoulder. The man was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. My phone buzzed, and I saw another text from Rachel. "Where are you going?" "My brother is there to help you." The text sent chills down my spine. How did she know I had walked away? I hadn't mentioned it, and there was no way she could see me through the fog. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and headed straight back to my dorm. I spent the next hour pacing my room, replaying the encounter in my head. Something about the man had been deeply wrong. His demeanor, his insistence, the mud on his shoes, and the texts from Rachel. They felt almost calculated, like she, or whoever was texting me, was watching my every move. Just as I was starting to calm down, I heard a knock at my door. My stomach dropped. No one ever came to my dorm unannounced. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. It was the same man from the park, standing in the dimly lit hallway. "Daniel, open up," he called, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk." I stepped back, my hands trembling. How had he found me? I hadn't told Rachel where I lived, and my profile didn't include my dorm address. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The man knocked again, louder this time. "I know you're in there, Daniel," he said. "You shouldn't have walked away." I grabbed my phone and dialed campus security. While waiting for them to answer, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The man started laughing, a low, guttural sound that echoed through the hallway. "They can't help you," he said, as if he knew exactly what I was doing. Campus security picked up, and I whispered into the phone, explaining the situation. They assured me someone would be there within minutes. Meanwhile, the knocking stopped, and when I looked through the peephole again, the man was gone. When campus security arrived, they found no sign of him. I gave them a description and explained what had happened, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They offered to patrol the area for the next few nights, but that was little comfort. The next day, I tried to find Rachel's profile on the dating app, but it had vanished. I searched my messages for the conversations we'd had, but they were gone too, as if she, or whoever had posed as her, had deleted the entire thread. It was like she had never existed. For weeks, I was on edge, jumping at shadows and double-checking the locks on my door. I never saw the man again, but the encounter left a lasting impression. Every time I walk through campus at night, I feel like I'm being watched, and sometimes, when I'm alone in my room, I hear faint footsteps outside my door. To this day, I wonder who or what Rachel and her brother really were. Was it a scam? A setup for something far darker? Or was there some malicious game at play, orchestrated by forces I can't explain? All I know is that I never went back to that park, and I never used a dating app again. When I was 19, I took a part-time job as a janitor at the local community college. The hours were flexible and the pay was decent, so it seemed like a good deal. The work itself was monotonous. Sweeping classrooms, emptying trash cans, and mopping endless hallways. Most nights, I worked alongside Mr. Harris, the head janitor, and a few others. But occasionally, I'd be left alone to close up, which always made me uneasy. The building was massive, with dark hallways that seemed to stretch forever. At night, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of old fluorescent lights. One Thursday evening, Mr. Harris had to leave early. He handed me the master keys and gave me a list of tasks to finish before locking up. "Don't forget the basement," he reminded me. "Make sure the storage rooms are locked tight. Text me if anything comes up." I nodded, but my stomach churned. The basement was the worst part of the building. A maze of narrow hallways, dim lighting, and old storage rooms filled with forgotten equipment. It had a damp, musty smell and an eerie stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I always tried to finish my tasks down there as quickly as possible. By 10 p.m., I'd cleaned most of the classrooms and was ready to tackle the basement. The elevator was out of order, so I had to take the stairs. Each step echoed loudly, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. At the bottom of the staircase, a single flickering light illuminated the hallway ahead. I gripped the keys tightly, my footsteps slowing as I made my way toward the storage rooms. The first task was to store a stack of chairs left over from an event earlier that day. The furthest storage room was cluttered with random items: folding tables, old lockers, and several art mannequins covered in heavy tarps. The mannequins always unnerved me. Even covered, their vaguely human shapes made it feel like I wasn't alone. I pushed the thought aside and stacked the chairs in the corner. As I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. One of the tarps had slipped off, revealing part of a mannequin's wooden arm. My heart skipped a beat. I was certain all the mannequins had been covered when I entered. I approached cautiously, my pulse quickening with each step. The mannequin stood motionless, of course, but the sight of it unsettled me. Its blank, featureless face seemed to stare right through me. I shook my head and pulled the tarp back over it, muttering to myself, "It's just your imagination," I said, trying to calm the rising unease. But as I turned to leave, I thought I heard something. A faint rustling sound, like fabric brushing against the floor. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound stopped. I scanned the room, but nothing seemed out of place. Telling myself it was just the old building settling, I locked the door and stepped back into the hallway. The air felt heavier now, and every shadow seemed deeper. I quickened my pace, eager to finish my tasks and get out. As I walked toward the next storage room, the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I stopped and turned, but the hallway was empty. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I stood there, straining to listen. The footsteps had been slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I texted Mr. Harris. "I think someone's in the basement." His reply came almost immediately. "No one else should be there. Lock up and leave." I felt a wave of relief, validation that I wasn't just imagining things. But leaving wasn't so simple. I still had to lock the remaining storage rooms. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to finish as quickly as possible. The sooner I was done, the sooner I could leave. As I approached the second storage room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I knew for a fact it had been closed earlier. I hesitated, debating whether to peek inside or just lock it and leave. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door open and flicked on the light. The room was empty, but something was off. One of the tarps was crumpled on the floor, and the mannequin it had covered was gone. My stomach dropped. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to every shadowy corner. There was no sign of the missing mannequin or anyone else. I backed out of the room, locked the door, and started walking briskly toward the stairs. That's when I heard it. A loud metallic clang from above. I stopped in my tracks, looking up. The sound came again, this time accompanied by faint, shuffling movements. It was coming from the air vents. My mind raced. Was someone crawling through the ducts? The thought was absurd, but the noise was unmistakable. The metallic banging grew louder, more frantic, as if whoever or whatever was inside was trying to break through. I felt a cold sweat drip down my back as I sprinted toward the stairs. Before I could reach them, the lights flickered and went out. Panic set in as I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate the darkness. The air vents rattled above me, and I could hear faint, labored breathing. I shined the light upward but saw nothing. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the first storage room. The sound of chairs toppling over echoed through the basement. Against my better judgment, I turned and ran back to the room. I had to know what was happening. I unlocked the door and swung it open, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The chairs were scattered across the floor, and the tarps had been completely removed. The mannequins were no longer in the corner. They were standing in the center of the room, arranged in a perfect line, their featureless faces tilted toward the door. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. As I turned to run, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. One of the mannequins had shifted, just slightly, but enough to confirm it wasn't my imagination. I bolted out of the room, locking the door behind me. The air vents above rattled violently as I sprinted up the stairs, not stopping until I was outside the building. I didn't bother locking the basement door. I jumped into my car and sped home, too shaken to think straight. The next morning, I told Mr. Harris what had happened. He laughed at first but grew serious when I mentioned the mannequins and the air vents. "You know," he said, Years ago, there was a break-in down there. Some guy lived in the vents for weeks before security caught him. They said he was off, kept talking about the figures watching him. Creepy stuff. I quit the job a week later. To this day, I can't be near mannequins or basements without feeling a surge of dread. Whatever I encountered that night, I'm convinced it wasn't just in my head.